This video and gameplay will contain no spoilers for Spider-Man Miles Morales, so sit back, relax, and enjoy a 25-year-old man lose his mind about comic book characters. Welcome back to the Split Screen Media YouTube channel, True Believers, where today we're going to be talking about Miles Morales for the PS4. Now, I know what you're thinking. Where's the podcast? Well, for this video, we're going to do something a little bit different. Normally, it would be Chris and I recording the usual Split Screen Media podcast, which we put up every single Friday. But for this video, I thought we'd go a little bit different. In episode 4 of the podcast, I gave my brief thoughts on Miles Morales, and I wanted to go into a little bit more depth here. I've finally 100% of the game. I've done every side mission, collectible, pretty much everything you can imagine besides New Game Plus, which I'm going to be streaming at twitch.com/splitscreenconnor if you want to check it out. But regardless, I feel like my opinions of the game at this point are pretty solidified, and it turns out I have a lot more to say about it than I thought I did. Now, I want to say from the get-go, this is not a bad game. It's actually a really good game and a fun little side story follow-up to Spider-Man PS4. It just doesn't really do much in the way of innovation or the same kind of gripping storytelling that we had in Spider-Man PS4. But we'll get into that in a second. First, as a disclaimer, I want to say that I am a massive Spider-Man fan. So take everything I say here with a grain of salt. So keep in mind that I may not be as hard on this game as I would be as a more casual fan who just comes in wanting a fun experience. I have a pretty long, hardcore, and sometimes tumultuous relationship with the webhead, so keep that in mind as you listen. So what I want to do with this video is divide it up into 3 categories. What I liked about the game, what I didn't like about the game, and then sort of my wish list for whatever Insomniac game is next. Could be Spider-Man 2, could be another spin-off game. Whatever they decide to do in the Insomniac verse, I have a couple ideas. So with that being said, let's talk about what I liked. First and foremost is the swinging. I should say from the get-go, Spider-Man PS4 is the best Spider-Man game that's ever been made. It's pretty much unmatched. The only ones I would say would even compare are Ultimate Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, the movie tie-in game. The swinging in that game was pretty much perfect, but Insomniac really stepped it up here for Spider-Man Miles Morales. The swinging animations in general are better, and I think they really showcase a younger, less experienced Miles trying to find his groove as Spider-Man. Instead of Peter's more controlled swinging look, you get Miles who kind of flails around and doesn't look like he knows exactly what he's doing, which matches the character perfectly. I also think that the overall fluidity of the swinging system has been greatly improved. It feels much easier and faster to swing around the city, which is saying a lot because the first game I think did this exceptionally well. The second thing that I really liked about this game was the combat. Now again, the combat's going to be very similar to Spider-Man PS4 here, but the tweaks that they've made I think make a pretty significant difference in terms of overall feel. Miles has 2 abilities that Peter doesn't have in the first game, which are his Venom Strike, which is basically bioelectricity, and his invisibility or camouflage. The Venom Strike is great because it can either be used to target one specific more powerful enemy, or used as an area of attack where you can defeat multiple enemies at the same time. This is great too because the game sports a shit ton of enemies. It probably gives you about 2 to 3 times more enemies than Spider-Man PS4, which is saying a lot because this game is significantly shorter. The last thing I want to talk about with what I loved about this game is the attention to detail to the little things. The voice actor who played Miles recorded his voice twice when you're talking to people on the phone from the suit. Once for when Miles is just walking around in game, and once for when he's swinging around the city. If you, the player, choose to walk around the streets during the times when he's talking to people on his phone, when Miles is swinging through the city, however, he raises his voice in order to match all of the sounds of the wind and everything else rushing by him. It's small, but it's definitely an attention to detail that's really cool. I also think it's interesting that they added new voice lines for if you've beaten the game and if you haven't beaten the game. A lot of the side missions require you to go into enemy camps and take everyone out, and there's different dialogue for whether you've beaten the game already or you haven't, and Miles will bring up certain plot details based on where you are in the game. That is a crazy amount of voiceover, and I can't even imagine how much extra work that was. Now that may seem like a short list of things that I liked about this game, but I promise you those far outweigh any of the negatives I'm about to say. That being said, I still do have some relatively minor complaints along with a couple big ones, so let's get into it. First of all, the story. The story of this game compared to Spider-Man PS4 is just a little bit bland. It's fairly predictable, the characters are a little bit flat, and the pacing goes at such a breakneck speed that it doesn't really give you time to settle or sink in to any of these characters and learn truly what their backstories are. While I'm not going to spoil anything in this review, one example of this is when you meet the main villain about maybe a third of the way through the story, and in the same cutscene that you meet the villain, you find out the villain's identity, and then the story just moves on from there. In Spider-Man PS4, it felt like you were able to take these little breaks or have these moments of levity with Peter, and I feel like you don't really get that in this game. It almost feels like Insomniac is sprinting towards the finish line because they're just trying to get to work on Spider-Man 2. Now again, this story isn't terrible, but it's definitely not as good as it could have been. Just a few of the things I feel like they could have gone into more detail with are, how is Miles really affected by the death of his father in the last game? How did he meet Genki, and how did Genki find out that he was Spider-Man? How are Finn and Genki's relationship both fighting over Miles as a best friend? What is Miles' real relationship to his uncle that we only really see the surface level of in this game? Now, some of this might be more fleshed out in Spider-Man 2, but I felt like this game was the perfect opportunity to really do a deep dive on Miles' character, just like they did to Peter in the first game. The second criticism I have is going to depend entirely on what system you have. If you play this game on PS5, I'm sure it's going to look totally beautiful with all the ray tracing and the performance mode at 60 frames per second. I, however, was not lucky enough to get a PS5, so I played this on a base PS4, and oh man, are there some graphical problems. It's interesting to me that at some points this game looks worse than the game that came before it, and I think the reason is because Spider-Man PS4 was optimized for a PS4, whereas Miles Morales was optimized for a PS5 and then downgraded to be played on a PS4, and you can definitely tell. Swinging around the city has a lot of frame rate hiccups. Sometimes when you're in enemy bases, it feels like the game turns into a slideshow with how much the frame rates dip. There's a lot of different pop-in, and 4 times when I was playing, the game froze and started loading the map while I was playing. I thought the game had crashed. As much as I hate to say it, in terms of the performance, this game definitely feels incomplete. It could have easily used an extra 6 months of polish just to make sure that some of these frame rate issues, graphical issues, and glitches weren't present in the final product. While not a huge deal, and especially not a huge deal if you have a PS5, it definitely is enough to drag the experience down a little bit, and worth mentioning here. The third thing I want to complain about is the obvious lack of innovation. Besides what I mentioned earlier, this game feels very similar to the game that came before it. Not a lot has been done to improve the overall quality of the game or feel of it. Now, you could probably justify it in your head as saying, oh, well, this isn't a full new game, it's just sort of an expansion or really, really large DLC. But $50 is a lot of money, and I don't know of any DLC that costs $50 besides this. That seems like a lot of money for only about 5 or 6 hours of actual story mode. If you really want to get the most out of this game, you're going to have to 100% it like I did, which I know most people don't want to do. If you're just playing for the story, I would say wait till this is about $20 or $30, and then it would probably be worth your time. I don't generally like to give actual numbered scores for products, because I feel like it can get a little bit misconstrued as to what's a good number, what's a bad number, and people can get up in arms about a score given. But for this first video, to try and make my point as clear as possible, I think I'll give it a numbered score just to kind of give you an idea of how I feel about it. If Spider-Man PS4 is a 9, this is probably pretty close to a 7. Now, a 7 isn't bad, but I definitely think there's a lot of room for improvement going forward, and I'm going to talk about that right now. The first thing I want to see in Spider-Man 2 is better collectibles. Pigeons and backpacks and time capsules are not good collectibles. I don't know how many times we have to tell Insomniac this. Just do what the old games did. They had comic book tokens that gave you comic book panels and cover pages. Done. It's that easy. I appreciate them trying to work the collectibles into the story somehow, and that's why we're getting collectibles that are kind of boring, but honestly, I would prefer something like the secret tokens from Ultimate Spider-Man. It's way more fun and gives you way more incentive to actually go around the map and look. The second thing I would love to see, and I know this is kind of a pipe dream, but multiplayer in this game would be amazing. Since there are probably going to be 2 Spider people patrolling the city in this new game, it would be awesome to have your friend be able to join in either couch co-op or online style so you could both fight crime in the city together. While this is the least likely thing on my wish list to happen, I still think it would be really cool. Number 3 would just be bringing in some new additions to the web swinging. While the web swinging here is already pretty perfect, I would love to see them implement some old web swinging techniques from the previous Spider-Man games. The web zip from Ultimate Spider-Man is so much better than the web zip in the newer games. And I wish you could climb up and down the web to change your momentum a la Spider-Man Web of Shadows. It would also be pretty cool to shoot webs out of 2 different hands like you could in Spider-Man 2, but I don't think that's going to happen. The fourth thing they need seems like it should be simple, but it really hasn't been for Spider-Man games of the past. A better camera when you're inside. I don't know why every single Spider-Man game has had a problem with its camera when it goes indoors, but it always seems like it doesn't really know where to go and it just freaks out. It never locks onto the enemy you want it to, and it always feels like you're not seeing the entire field of view. In the Spider-Man 1 movie tie-in game, every time you went onto the ceiling, you would have this view where the ceiling would turn invisible and you would look down to see Spider-Man and everything he could see below. That game came out in 2002 and still has a better camera than any other Spider-Man game I've played. I really do feel like that alone would solve so many of these indoor camera problems. This next thing that I want to see is definitely something I think is going to happen, but is worth mentioning anyway. Better side missions. The side missions that we get in this game are either helping some guy find his pigeons, or going through the sewer to try and break up a blockage, or investigating some guy cheating on his wife. This is not fun. This is where I think Insomniac could really take a page out of the Arkham Asylum developers. Their side missions were great because they featured other characters in the Batman universe. You would have one where Batman's trying to figure out what's happening with Man-Bat, then you'd have another one with Two-Face and Clayface. It would be other characters in that universe. I think it would be awesome to have a side mission where you help Daredevil do something, or Wolverine, or Luke Cage. Add a couple other heroes to this universe, and I know that people would love it. The last thing on my wish list is my numero uno. It's the one thing that I think they really need to do. Change back Peter Parker's face. Insomniac, I really tried. I did. I played through this whole game trying to give the new face a chance, and it's just not it. While I hate that you did change the face in the first place, my biggest problem is that it looks worse. The animations don't look nearly as good as they did in Spider-Man PS4, and Peter looks way too young. It's weird to see him and Miles together because he's supposed to be a good 8 years older than him, and he looks like he's 2 years younger. Just so the audience can understand, look at this face right here, and now look at this one. Look at the original, and look at the new one. Look at how the original's face looks like a 25-year-old who's stressed and tired and just needs a break. He's got kind of a receding hairline. There's bags under his eyes. He looks like a war-torn Spider-Man. And look at this new kid. That's exactly what he is, a kid. He looks like a child. Even if you're not going to bring back John Bubniak to do the motion capture and you're going to keep Ben Jordan as Peter Parker, then this face needs some work. I know that Insomniac is probably scared of changing things back because they don't want to look foolish, but I'll offer you an olive branch. Anyone at Insomniac is watching this. Just put both faces in the game. When you start up Spider-Man 2, give players the option to choose between the original PS4 face and the new Spider-Man Remastered PS5 face. That way, everybody gets exactly what they want. The 3 people out there who love the new face can have that, and everybody who played Spider-Man PS4 and got attached to that character can play with the old face. Just do something about this face, because something has to change if we're going to believe that this is our version of Peter Parker. And on that note, I want to thank everybody for watching. This is my first time doing any sort of review on this channel, so let me know ways that I can improve or things that you'd like to see in the future. Chris is also, on occasion, planning on doing videos like this, so let him know what you want to see him review as well. Make sure to like and subscribe, and check out our podcast, which comes out every Friday. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Also, put in the Captain Universe suit. I can't believe it wasn't in the first Spider-Man PS4 game. Put it in. It's awesome. It's so cool. Just put it